Moments after entering the courtroom, Ohio school shooter TJ Lane took off his shirt. Underneath was a T-shirt with the word killer handwritten on it.
God! 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 God!
Let's head to Massachusetts, where there's a confrontation between a student and teacher that has a horrific ending.
On the shocking killing of the high school math teacher, a 14-year-old student you see there under arrest right now.
Philip Chisholm was only 14 and in 9th grade when he brutally murdered his 24-year-old math teacher, Colleen Ritzer, at Danvers High School, Massachusetts, on the 22nd of October, 2013. Ritzer was known to be a jovial character who was always willing to help her students with problems, and this endeared the students to her. However, it seems Chisholm was not one of those students because on the 22nd of October, 2013, his reaction after he was innocently asked by Ritzer to stay after school for some lessons was nothing short of horrific.
As Chisholm, her own student and only 14 at the time, strangled and stabbed her.
On that fateful day, Chisholm had stayed behind and trailed Ritzer into one of the school toilets where he attacked and then stabbed her 16 times with a box cutter. And after confirming that she was dead, he then stole her credit card and dumped her body into a garbage can, which he dragged and hid behind the school, but not before once again assaulting Ritzer's lifeless body, this time with a tree branch. Chisholm had planned the entire murder in advance and even brought a change of clothes as well as gloves and a mask, as he hoped to escape being spotted, even attempting to skip school the next day. However, the ordeal was captured by the school's security cameras, and Chisholm was caught the following morning, with his hands still bloodstained as he hadn't washed them, and he was promptly arrested after confessing to his actions later that afternoon. Police were finally able to locate Ritzer's half-naked body covered with leaves, the tree branch still lodged in her private part, and a handwritten note presumably from Chisholm which read, "I hate you all." Despite all the evidence labeled against him, Chisholm chose to plead not guilty in a November 2013 trial at a district court. However, the case was then moved to the Superior Court.
001, charging on the 22nd day of October 2013 at Danvers in the County of Essex, did assault and beat Colleen Ritzer with the intent to murder her, and by such assault and beating did kill and murder said Colleen Ritzer. What say you, sir, to this indictment? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Not guilty.
Philip Chisholm was indicted for the aggravated rape, armed robbery, and murder of Colleen Ritzer. Massachusetts law allows for teenagers to be tried as adults, and with such a heinous crime committed, Chisholm, who was found guilty at a December 2015 hearing, was eventually sentenced to serve 40 years to life in prison on the 26th of February, 2016.
Philip Chisholm has been found guilty of brutally and murdering his 9th grade teacher when he was just 14 years old. The now 16-year-old was accused of killing 24-year-old Colleen Ritzer in October 2013 at Danvers High School in Massachusetts.
At his court showing, what Chisholm did shocked the entire courtroom. Despite being known to be antisocial, Chisholm showed a very chilling demeanor in the court. One time he bragged about becoming the teacher with his actions and on several occasions had to be removed from the courtroom due to his behavior. Even after he received his life sentence, his face showed no real sign of emotion as he was proven to have planned the murder for weeks. Ritzer's grieving parents were also in the courtroom and could not hide their anguish at his actions. As Chisholm was only 16 at the time of sentencing, he was eligible for parole after 38 years, having already served 2 of his sentences. This was despite the wishes of Ritzer's parents, who pleaded for a harsher sentence.
This court is constitutionally obligated to set a parole date no more than 25 years for her murder. While Colleen Ritzer's rape and murder were inextricably intertwined, this court may not punish the defendant with more prison time for the than justice demands for the purposes of avoiding constitutional limitations imposed by our Massachusetts Declaration of Rights.
However, one of the major talking points of the verdict was the possibility that Chisholm ends up being rehabilitated at an earlier date, although relatives of the victim would hope this wouldn't be the case here. Now, let's head to Milwaukee, where tension reaches its peak as Shawnell Jackson awaited his verdict.
Later, his family and the public would be shocked to discover that Jackson's uncle had turned him into the police.
On the 6th of July, 2009, Nathan Potter, a 21-year-old film student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, was shot and killed in an attempted robbery while walking near his River West apartment. There were 2 suspects in his murder. 19-year-old Derek J. Thomas, and the actual man who pulled the trigger, 18-year-old Shawnell Jackson. And both men were also alleged to have shot and injured another man about 12 hours later. Witnesses were able to identify Jackson from a group of photos, and evidence from both incidents suggested that the attacker had used the same .45 caliber handgun. Investigators were also able to find out about Jackson's accomplice, Thomas, who had been acting as a lookout. Both men were eventually caught about a month later, arrested and charged for their respective crimes before being detained. During a February 2010 hearing, the young Jackson's expression showed neither remorse nor sorrow over his actions, although he did eventually read out an apology. The father of the victim, John Potter, called his actions evil and petitioned the judge to give him a befitting sentence. Potter's mother also reacted to the situation, saying that Jackson didn't deserve any leniency from the court. Jackson was eventually convicted of his crimes, and on the 16th of April, 2010, he was handed a life sentence without the possibility of parole at the sentencing hearing. He was also handed 5 years for attempted robbery and 5 years for the non-fatal shooting which occurred on the same day. And the way he reacted shocked everyone in the courtroom. Nevertheless, Jackson still had the audacity to smirk at his victim's family as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Jackson's accomplice, Thomas, was handed a 12-year sentence for his role in the death of Nathan Potter, as well as the subsequent non-fatal shooting. Following the verdict, Jackson's family began to hurl insults directed at Potter's family, which more or less confirmed that he wasn't always influenced by the right people. But ultimately, he will have more than enough time behind bars to think about his crime as he spends the rest of his life in jail. Sometimes, passion could lead people to commit the most unspeakable crimes out of revenge. And even teenagers aren't left out, as students at the Chardon High School were about to find out about Thomas T.J. Lane's love life in the worst possible way.
Moments after entering the courtroom, Ohio school shooter T.J. Lane took off his shirt. Underneath was a T-shirt with the word "Killer" handwritten on it.
On the morning of the 26th of February, 2012, 6 students were shot in the cafeteria of Chardon High School, Ohio. 3 of them ended up dead, with 2 others hospitalized, one of which ended up permanently paralyzed. The perpetrator? 17-year-old sophomore Thomas T.J. Lane III. Lane was a former student of Chardon High who had switched to Lake Academy Alternative School for special students, but used the same bus as most of the victims. At around 7:30 a.m. local time, Lane stood up in the Chardon High School cafeteria and began shooting towards 5 male students at a table with a .22 caliber handgun. And as he fled while being chased by a couple of teachers, he shot at another victim, this time a female student. Lane was eventually identified and arrested by police outside the school near his car, which was parked close by. Of his 6 victims, 3 managed to survive, including 17-year-old Nick Walczak, who was shot several times, but the other 3 weren't so lucky. According to student witnesses, Lane had something of a rivalry with one of the victims, Russell King Jr., because he had recently begun dating Lane's ex-girlfriend. Since Lane was under the age of 18 and not formally charged as an adult, he was considered by the law as a juvenile, and a detention hearing, rather than a trial, was held for him on the 28th of February 2012. Lane apparently had a history of juvenile delinquency, and after his arrest, the presiding judge allowed the release of his juvenile records to the press. The records revealed that Lane had been arrested twice in December 2009, once for assisting an assault on his uncle, and the other for committing an assault himself. Prosecutors indicated that they wanted Lane charged as an adult, and eventually on the 1st of March 2012, he was formally charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of aggravated attempted murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. However, the judge postponed the decision for Lane to get a mental competency evaluation. Lane was finally indicted on all 6 charges that June, and months later, on the 26th of February 2013, the 1-year anniversary of the shootings, Lane pled guilty to the charges, with his sentencing hearing date set for the 19th of March 2013. However, on the day of his sentencing, Lane's behavior would send shockwaves throughout the court. As he entered the courtroom, he removed his dress shirt to reveal a white t-shirt which had the word "Killer" handwritten across the front. And not only that, Lane also smiled and smirked at the judge and the victims' families throughout the hearing. Lane was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole, but after being sentenced, Lane would once again shock the courtroom. This time, he uttered a quite graphic statement over the murder of his victims to their families, before hitting them with the F word and throwing up a middle finger to the attendees.
In Ohio, a teenager convicted of a high school shooting that killed 3 students is back in custody after daring escape overnight. TJ Lane climbed a prison fence last night with 2 prison inmates.
The story of Thomas Lane wasn't over, however, and on the 11th of September 2014, he escaped from the Allen Correctional Institution along with 2 other inmates using a makeshift ladder. Lane was eventually captured near the woods a day later and then transferred to the Ohio State Supermax Penitentiary. Today, Lane spends his days behind bars at the Southern Ohio Maximum Security Correctional Facility and would probably be there for the rest of his life. Speaking of life sentences, this next teenager's actions were so gruesome that the courtroom was left in shock.
God! 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 God!
On the 7th of December 2018, 2 19-year-olds, Trey Ingraham and Jordan Peyton, were shot and killed in an apartment at the Jade Park Apartment Homes in Daytona Beach. Peyton had been shot at 6 times, while Ingraham had been shot at 4 times and their bodies abandoned. The shooter was later identified to be 19-year-old former Bethune-Cookman University student Damon Kemp, who had broken into the apartment complex that morning. Kemp, who was armed with a pistol, found his way into the apartment of his old friend Ingraham, where he occasionally used to stay before being asked to leave. He reportedly shot multiple times at Ingraham and his roommate Peyton as they tried to flee before leaving them for dead. He then proceeded to break into a different apartment in the same building, but the resident managed to push him out and lock the door. Reports reveal that Daytona Beach police had received a call about the break-in after neighbors heard the gunshots. As they arrived at the scene, they met Kemp, who was still making his way out of the building. But they had no idea of the murders and only insisted that he stop walking towards them. Despite one of the police officers having his gun drawn out, a soaked Kemp continued to walk towards them and began yelling while also seeming to confess to the murder of Ingraham. The bodies of Trey Ingraham and Jordan Peyton were only found about 14 hours after the gunshots were heard. But by that time, Kemp had already been arrested for the earlier break-in. A .40 caliber Glock was found in a nearby pond, believed to be where Kemp had immersed himself to wash away the blood following the shootings. Kemp's palm print was found on a holster of the murder weapon, and shell casings found in the apartment were also matched to the Glock, which reportedly belonged to Ingraham. At his first hearing following the murders, Kemp would act erratically, screaming the word God multiple times, and making faces as if to suggest that he had gone insane. Later, during his subsequent trial, Kemp's defense attorney made all sorts of claims to deny Kemp of responsibility towards his actions, despite the evidence. However, the prosecutors dismissed these claims and said that whatever mental issues he might have been suffering from weren't enough to declare legal insanity. Kemp was eventually charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder with a firearm and 1 count of armed burglary of an occupied dwelling with assault or battery, and was held at the Volusia County Branch Jail following his arrest in 2018. It took almost 5 years, but Kemp eventually had his sentencing hearing on the 29th of August, 2023. And although he didn't testify at his May 2023 trial, he did make a statement at his sentencing, which was broadcast via a Zoom stream. Kemp tried to be remorseful towards the families of the victims, claiming that he understood their pain. But he also did claim that there was no evidence against him and that he had no previous criminal case, and asked the judge for leniency in his sentencing. Kemp refused to take responsibility for his actions and tried to score pity points despite trying to cover up the crime by jumping into the pond. Ultimately, prosecutors and the victims' families asked for life sentences due to the overwhelming evidence. And Kemp, who was found guilty of all charges earlier that May, was handed 3 consecutive life sentences for his actions. Coming up next, we have another thrilling installment that you won't want to miss.